Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for another Escape From Tarkov video. In this one, I've got a video topic voted for by my Patreon members, covering some tips to make money after the wipe and get off to a good start with your economy. Right after a fresh wipe, money is more important than ever, but at the same time, it's harder to come by since you don't have the tools you need to get into some of the most valuable looting areas. The upcoming flea market changes, being able to sell found in raid items only, is going to hit players like me pretty hard who start up their own AK attachment store in the early game to make some extra cash. That being said, there's still plenty of ways to make a decent profit in the early game and bankroll some rubles. In this video, I'll go over some of the best spots to loot before you have keys, some general advice for maximizing your flea market profits, and some tips on how saving money helps you to make money. So with that intro out of the way, let's talk about how you can make some good money at the start of the wipe. To start off, I'll go over some of the top places for you to loot in the early game, before you'll have keys to get behind the locked doors where some of the top tier stuff is stashed. First up, I'll always recommend Interchange as a great place to start off looting in the early game, because it has a great mix of valuable items to sell, questing and hideout items you'll need to progress, and tons of weapon crates so you can stock up on gear for future raids. For sheer value, the best places to check on Interchange before you have keys are the tech stores, which spawn valuable electronics loot like graphics cards, phones, and military items. You can find these tech stores clustered around the center of the mall near Oli and the Kiba store. Techlight on the second floor, plus the store just below it under the escalator, Rasmussen down the hall, and the knockoff Apple store down the hall from Kiba all spawn pretty good tech loot. You can also check Mantis on the ground floor for other valuable items on the shelves. Aside from this, you can find tons of valuable questing and hideout items in the 3 large superstores and the offices for each one of them. There's also plenty of weapon crates to loot on this map, as I mentioned, and if you want a more detailed look at my loot runs on Interchange, I'll link my video covering that in the description. Next up, Reserve is the second map I would recommend for pure money farming in the early game, though it's a bit more complicated due to the extractions having special requirements. In the early game, my recommendation is to try and take a large tactical rig and no backpack and loot the barracks buildings around the helicopter courtyard, since they all have tons of valuable military loot spawns, ammo, and weapon crates. It might seem counterintuitive to not bring a backpack when you're trying to make money, but the sewer extraction on Reserve is pretty close to the courtyard, and you can only extract from it when you have no backpack. In the early game, you can make a surprising amount of cash by doing quick runs, picking up the military loot, stashing it in your container and tactical rig, and then just quickly ditching out of the raid through the sewer. You can also commit to a full clear and take the train, or trigger the bunker door, but the sewer run is extremely profitable and generally quite safe. Again, I have a few videos covering money making runs on Reserve, and I'll link those in the description so you can see where all the loot spawns. While there's plenty of loot that you don't need keys to access, if you want to make some real money, you'll eventually need to acquire a good set of keys, and the earlier you get started on this, the better. The best places to find keys in the current state of the game are in jackets you can loot on each map, on dead SCAVs, and in the static spawn points for each key, in that order. Jackets are a gold mine for keys, and you should try and loot them anytime you see them. Whether you keep the keys or sell them, these jackets can often make you a pretty big profit. Every map has jackets to loot, but the highest concentration of jackets in a single spot are on Shoreline in the village. Just check every house and building here, and you'll surely walk away with some keys. Killing SCAVs is an alright way to find keys, but is obviously more dangerous than looting a jacket. You should still check every SCAV pocket for keys and keycards though. Finally, if you're looking for a specific key, you can check the official wiki page and find the exact spawn point. This can be a grind, and it can be boring checking the same spot for a key repeatedly, but it works if you're desperate for one specific key. You can also simply take the easy route and check the flea market to see if someone is selling the key you're looking for. In my opinion, it's very worth it to spend a lot of money early on keys, but that's up to you and how broke you're willing to go in the name of being rich one day. Hidden stashes were a new addition in the 0.12 patch, scattered around every map in sneaky, out-of-the-way locations. They spawn a large random assortment of loot, and they often contain valuable stuff and hard-to-find questing items. These stashes are perfect for rat runs because they're generally in quiet, out-of-the-way locations where you can loot them and then slink away without being bothered. In the early game, these things are a great source of easy money and gear, since they often spawn some decent weapons, ammo, meds, and attachments you can use for future raids. There is tons of these stashes, way too many for me to quickly go over them in this video. However, some very lovely people have created some fairly easy to use maps for these stashes, and you can find most of them on the official wiki page. Just search a map, like Shoreline for example, and you can find a map on the wiki page showing the location of every stash. Use this as a guide, memorize their location, locations and try to check them whenever you're nearby. You might be surprised at how much cash you make off the drops in these things, plus they're a big help when farming quest items. I'll put a link to the wiki in the description so you can check that for these stash locations. In my video covering tips for after the wipe, I recommended doing less scav runs if you want to level up quickly, but when you're farming money, scav raids are a great option. I especially like it when you get into a raid that's almost halfway through, because most of the dangerous PMCs have already extracted, and all that's left are the rats quietly looting to their heart's content. Scav raids let you try and make some profit without risking any of your own cash, which can lead to some huge gains if you have a good raid. Some people like to go all out with their scav and hunt players, but I use it to sneak around and pick up whatever valuable stuff I can find before running to extraction. If you check the time and you're late into the raid as a scav, you should be pretty safe to check most of the map and pick up scraps from kills, plus loot any good spots people skipped while fighting. Then, when you're done the raid, you can simply transfer your weapons and gear to your PMC and run a second free raid with some cheap gear to go 0 to hero and make even more money.
I can't believe I missed that first shot when he was just standing there.
This next tip is pretty self-explanatory. You should keep a good mental checklist of what items are valuable and at least have a vague idea of what is the most valuable stuff that you're currently carrying. There's literally thousands of items in Tarkov, so it's impossible to have an exact memory of each one. However, you should be able to keep track of what the generally most valuable stuff is. This allows you to manage your loot well and only pick up the most valuable items. Then when you're Tetrising to fit something else into your backpack, you know what to drop to make room for more profit, and you know what should be kept in your container. If you have a good mental checklist of what's worth looting, you can avoid filling up your bag with worthless junk and increase your average profits by a pretty good percentage. The flea market has always been a good way to make some extra money ever since it was introduced. On many items, you can get a lot of extra profit selling them to other players as opposed to the traders. With the new flea market update in 12.6 making only found in raid items able to be sold on the market, it's going to be a bit more tricky to use it, but the same principle applies, and you should always check to see if you can get more money from the market as opposed to just selling an item to the traders. The most common items to get extra value out of are hideout items and quest items, so keep track of what other players need and be sure to stockpile them to sell on the market. If you get a few of them and wait for a good price, you can make some good money doing this as opposed to selling them one at a time for whatever the going rate is. Once you can craft stuff in the hideout, selling ammo and other items you craft is also a great money-making idea. On the flip side of this, you can also check the flea market to see if you can find anything you need to buy for a cheaper price. Common items to check for are basic armor and weapons that can be dropped by SCAVs, as well as meds that people find and end up listing on the market because they don't have the space or they just don't need it. In some ways, saving money is just as good as making money, and if you can cut down loadout costs with the market, it's always a good idea. Like I mentioned in my top 10 post-wipe tips video, the hideout is a great source of money once you get it upgraded to a certain point. In the beginning, it's more of an investment with some quality of life benefits, but once it's fully upgraded, the hideout basically prints money for you. In the early game, the ability to easily craft meds and basic ammo at the med station and workbench also helps you to save some money, since you can get crafted meds and ammo at a much cheaper price than from the traders. Check the hideout page on the official wiki so you know what items you're going to need to upgrade each unit, and make sure you grab any items you need for your next upgrades whenever you see them. As I mentioned earlier, reserve and interchange are great to check for this loot, so you should be able to find most of what you need by playing those maps on a couple farming runs. You don't want to go fully bankrupt early to upgrade the hideout, but you should be making steady progress on it at all times, especially considering some of the modules take a few real-life days to install once you have the parts. Sometimes when you're out farming for cash, you just want to avoid conflict altogether and dig through some bags for loot, which is a perfectly fine strategy. However, if you make it a point to check SCAV hotspots and drop at least a few groups of them every raid, you'll be making double time, earning good experience and generally good money from their loot as well. SCAV gear isn't always very valuable, but it's what they hoard away in their greasy pockets that you're after. SCAVs can spawn with really valuable stuff like keys, huge stacks of dollars and euros, labs cards, and rare barter loot like bitcoins, statues, and basically anything you can imagine. It's a bit like a slot machine every time you loot a SCAV. Sometimes you get a pack of croutons, and sometimes you get $1,000 in a labs card. The more you search though, the more likely you'll get a good drop, so kill and loot as many SCAVs as possible. On top of the potential for good drops, you'll be getting nice XP gains from the SCAV combat, so it's a good win-win all around. Well, that about covers it for these tips on making money post-wipe. I'm sure there'll be some new tweaks that we'll have to work around in the 12.6 patch, and I'll be putting out more videos like this once the patch hits and we have access to new crafting recipes and other ways to make some rubles. In any case, I hope you find this video helpful and can use some of these tips to get a good bankroll going after the wipe hits and takes all of our hard-earned rubles. It can be tough to get your feet under you in the early game, but if you can get a good economy by the mid game, it makes it a lot easier to do the PvP quests since you have some extra cash for good ammo and armor. I'll be streaming more Escape from Tarkov on Twitch, and if you want to catch a few raids sometime, there's a link to that in the description. There's also links to my Twitter and Discord server, as well as a link to my Patreon page for anyone interested in supporting the channel so I can commit more time to making content. Thanks for checking out the video. As always, feel free to leave any comments, corrections, or suggestions down below. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City. Woo.